Good morning, everyone. We are so excited to have co-author of the new book, A Path Appears, Transforming Lives, Creating Opportunity, Nicholas Kristof, and his wife, Cheryl Wu Dunn, also authors of Half the Sky. We are elated. I'm Marcia Wallace, co-founder of Dining for Women, and I want to thank you for taking time out of your really, really busy schedule to talk to us this morning about your new book, which just came out on Tuesday.
Well, thanks so much, Marcia. And Cheryl sends her regrets. She's supposed to be in an airplane right now, but actually she just emailed me that she's stuck at Newark Airport. So a flight was canceled. So she's, she's fuming and she's wishing that she were here right now too. But we're both just great fans of Dining for Women and of what you and all your members are doing.
Thank you. I want to start off by saying that you and Cheryl are heroes to the Dining for Women family. And while I know we're promoting A Path Appears and talking about that, I really want to thank you for writing Half the Sky, because when that book came out, you elevated by bringing the conversation into people's awareness. You elevated the work of all of the organizations who are working on behalf of women and girls around the world. And I was so, so excited. So thank you for doing that. Would you please share with your viewers how you selected the name A Path Appears and what your vision for the book is?
Sure. So after we wrote Half the Sky, then there were so many people who would, come to lectures and they'd say, wow, this is such an important cause of empowering women around the world, but what do I do? And we wanted to be able to answer those people better. And we also wanted to talk a little bit more about issues within the U.S. Half the Sky was 100% about issues abroad. We also wanted to incorporate questions about how to make a difference right here at home. And, our feeling is that about 2/3 of Americans every year donate to charity, but often, we all know not always very effectively. And we think we can do a better job in incorporating some of the real evidence about what works, what doesn't work, that has accumulated over the last decade or two, and inform people so that they can feel like they are having really more of a meaningful difference in making the world a better place to be.
Yeah. Given that, with your high profile with nonprofits and all the writing that you do about charities, you know about so many organizations that are doing great work, lots and lots of important causes and different ways to give than you could possibly incorporate into one book. I'm really curious about how you did decide what causes and organizations to include in the book and what it was about Dining for Women in particular that inspired you to include our organization in the book.
Sure. Well, I think there are so many people who want to give back in some form, partly because they think it's the right thing to do, partly because they want to find a little more meaning or fulfillment in their life, maybe partly because they want to model behavior for their children, altruistic behavior for their children. But, they also, their lives are busy. It's not as if they're going to quit their job and move off to Burundi to be an aid worker. And so trying to figure out some way of incorporating an element of effective give back in our busy lives is, I think, a challenge. And what appeals to me about Dining for Women is that it is a pretty simple, straightforward way of having an impact that anybody can take part in. And I think that also one of the mistakes we sometimes make is thinking that that giving or donating has to be this burden. It has to be this sort of painful sacrifice. And one of the things that I think the megachurches get absolutely right, I think one of the reasons for their success has been that they make giving and altruism this social activity and this kind of joyous occasion. And I think that the secular world can learn from that. And I think that that's very similar to the dining for women model. It's a little bit like church in the sense that there's a sense of fellowship, I assume, and it's social and it's meant to be fun. But part of the fun comes from this sense that one is actually doing the right thing. And so we think a lot of organizations that's a really useful model for the way we think about how to give back or how to find a little more meaning in our lives.
Thank you. You're talking a lot about making a difference, but doing it by supporting effective programs. And that's very important to Dining for Women and our members. In chapter 3 of your book, you introduce Professor Duflo's work of creating randomized control studies to determine effective methods of funding. Would you please talk briefly about what the benefits and the challenges are with micro lending, because we get a lot of applications for micro lending organizations, and we funded quite a number of them.
Yeah, sure. It used to be that we would, we would people would go and they sort of have a hunch about what works, and they'd maybe go look at it and they'd look at an evaluation. But in the history of the world, every organization's evaluation of its own interventions have shown that they're wildly successful. And there tends not to be a lot of really careful, rigorous outside evaluation, arm's length outside evaluation. And that is what has really changed with randomized controlled trials, that these are testing an intervention the way a pharmaceutical project is tested. You randomly assign some people to get some intervention, like microloans, and you randomly assign others not to get them or to get some other intervention. And then you measure carefully from a baseline how they change over time. And what that showed is that microloans do have an impact. And indeed, there are people who, when they get access to capital, they can start some businesses and thrive. There are entrepreneurs who really can use that capital, but it's maybe a less powerful effect than people had hoped. It makes a modest difference, but not a huge difference. And conversely, there are also some people who were not particularly entrepreneurial, who were not great business people, and there is some risk that if they are encouraged to get microloans and they're not good at starting a business, and they just end up more in debt than before. And so these trials showed that microloans are a modest help, but what it really showed is where there's a huge benefit is micro savings as opposed to micro loans, and that when you help people save their own money and then use that to start businesses, then that means that they have a financial padding, so that if a child needs a school uniform, if a woman needs to have a C-section or whatever it may be, that there is some reservoir. Somebody doesn't need to die necessarily. They have that money that can be used to start businesses, and that may be really where the miracle of microfinance is, not so much the lending part, but the savings part. And there's some great organizations we talk about that are engaged in it.
In your research for the book, did you find other methods of fighting poverty for women and girls that were a lot more effective than you thought that you didn't get to include in the book?
Well, the ones that we thought were most effective, we did talk about in the book. I think that one of the things that really struck us in the reporting was the importance of early interventions, and that's everything from giving women access to effective birth control if they want it. If they don't want to get pregnant, then help them ensure that they're not going to. And I mean, especially true of teenage girls, because there are so many problems that develop when kids have kids, affecting both that child and the mom. And those kind of interventions pay for themselves, helping that mom during pregnancy, so that she, if she's an at-risk teenager, so that she's not drinking or using drugs. In early childhood, getting access to helping her, coaching her on breastfeeding. The World Health Organization estimates that 600,000 babies a year could be, their lives could be saved if we had more effective breastfeeding around the world. And here is this intervention that is it seems so natural. It's obviously age old, and 600,000 babies a year die because moms aren't getting the support or coaching that they need for breastfeeding.
Yeah. As a former obstetric nurse, that really does resonate with me. Um, I'd like, if you would, a part of what you do in the book too is educate people about charity in general as an industry, if you will. And in chapter 11, you said that it's time to rethink what a charity should be. That outdated thinking are causing charities to be make it unlikely that they gain economies of scale, and that we focus too much on the ratio of fundraising and administrative expenses to program costs. Would you talk just a little bit about that?
Sure. I think that we instinctively think that a charity should be, spending all its money on services out there, and there's something to that. Obviously, if a charity is spending a lot of money building a huge building with marble lobbies and uh, holding wild parties for itself, that's not going to work. But on the other hand, you also want charities to have to be spending money on decent computer systems. You want them to train their staff to do the best job possible. You want them to do some marketing so that they can reach out to audiences. And above all, what really matters the most isn't these cost ratios, it's the impact that they have. And we cite, the example that in when polio was a huge problem here in the U.S., you could have had one charity that was addressing polio by walking people around in wheelchairs in the parks, and that would have been a nice thing to do for people who had polio, and that their cost ratio might have looked really good, and then you might have had somebody else developing the Salk vaccine against polio, but because they were hiring a lot of first-rate scientists, because they had a lot of lab expenses, their cost ratio might not have been so good, and they might have looked less appealing. But at the end of the day, they came up with a vaccine to stop polio, and obviously that was greater impact. So I don't think we shouldn't let ourselves be blinded by cost ratios. At the end of the day, what matters is impact, and that's obviously harder to measure.
Thank you. Okay, we only have 2 minutes left, and next question is really important. So the World Bank is estimating that according to your book, that by 2030, we can get close to 0% of people who live in extreme poverty. Is it realistic to think that that's possible without achieving gender equality? Isn't gender equality a root cause of extreme global poverty?
Gender inequality is absolutely a cause of extreme poverty. It's a reason, it's something that holds countries back. It's a factor in insecurity and violence and terrorism in all kinds of complex ways. One is that in societies where women are marginalized, then society often takes on the ethos of young men and becomes this more aggressive culture, if you will. And another is that in societies where women are marginalized, they tend not to have control over fertility, and they have lots and lots of kids. And so you have this very big youth bulge in the population. And countries that have a large youth bulge, a large population that is age 15 to 29, then those societies tend to be often destabilized and more prone to war or terrorism. So there are huge returns economically, socially, from educating girls, empowering women, and unless we do that, it's going to be really hard to make more progress on poverty. Having said that, realistically, this is something that takes time. In the U.S., we haven't achieved full gender equality. Globally, by 2030, we're not going to achieve full equity. I think we can achieve real progress in that direction by 2030, and education is just one of the most important escalators to get there. And I think that it is plausible that by 2030 we can largely eradicate extreme poverty, largely eradicate illiteracy. There will still be poor people, just as there are still poor people in the U.S., but folks who don't have access to education, who don't get schooling, who don't have access to a toilet, whose children die in vast numbers, that I think we really can chip away at and create a more equitable world. And it always strikes me that literacy is the basic for all of human history. Vast majority of humans have always been illiterate. And it was only in 1950 that we passed the point where a majority of adults could read. These days, more than 80% of adults worldwide can read. Soon we're going to hit 90%. And that fundamentally will be a really different world, and one that I think is going to be able to make more progress against poverty, more progress on gender equity, more progress in so many directions. So to me, this feels like kind of an exciting time to be alive, where we can really create a lot more opportunity. That's what you guys are doing in Dining for Women. That's what we try to do in A Path Appears. And I think we should acknowledge that, yeah, there are a lot of things going wrong all over the world, but there's also a lot of reason for hope.
And I think that people who read your book will come away feeling the same way and feel empowered and energized by all the different ways that they can make a difference. And so on behalf of Dining for Women members, chapter leaders, the programs we support, and all the women and girls who benefit from the money that we raise, and all the organizations that benefit from all the great work that you and Cheryl are doing, I want to thank you for your interest in all these issues and the time that you spend, and for being with us today. And we look forward to the documentary that'll be out in January. So I know you have a very busy schedule. Thank you so much for being with us.
Well, bravo, and bon appetit at your dinners.
Thanks.